Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for being here, for attending a 9 o'clock session, which is always a tricky one, especially after a nice presidency reception the last night. Well, thank you for coming and joining the ITF In Focus session on decarbonizing transport. Many of you will know that we have launched the Decarbonizing Transport Initiative back in 2016, right after the signature of the Paris Agreement. And since then, this initiative has been steadily growing, and we have been working more and more on this topic within the Secretariat. And we use each year this ITF In Focus session to give you a bit of an update of what has been happening the last year and to highlight one or two of the main projects that we have been working on and that we think are very relevant to share with you. So we will be doing also this today. In the very recent past, the ITF has focused a lot of efforts on working on what is commonly called the so-called hard-to-abate sectors, the transport subsectors that are perceived to be particularly difficult to decarbonize. This is shipping, aviation, and heavy-duty freight transport. So today's session will focus on these sectors, and particularly on what policymakers, but also businesses, can, or should be doing to tackle these sectors and to decarbonize them in order to meet our targets. But before I go any further, we want to kick off with a few introductory presentations. First of all, we will have Jari Kaupila, our head of the Secretary General Office here at the International Transport Forum, who will give us a quick glimpse into the Decarbonizing Transport Initiative to recall what it's all about and what the content of the initiative is. Then we will have Davide Amato from the European Commission, who will give us an overview of the European Green Deal and the policy efforts that the European Commission is doing in order to decarbonize the economy and the transport sector more specifically. So first to you, Jari. The floor is yours. Please come here. And I will then later on introduce Davide.
Thank you, Elisabeth, and good morning, everyone. Indeed, it's an early morning start for a session, but it's on an important topic of decarbonization. If I may have my slides up, please, it would be great. We do see dramatic challenges ahead of us. While we're waiting, we can just talk a little bit about that. The COVID, the situation in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine. But despite these challenges, I think it's important that we don't lose the sight of our objectives on climate change. And that's what we've been trying to keep the work going on the decarbonizing transport at the ITF over the years since the initiation of the Decarbonizing Transport Initiative in 2016. Let me give you a couple of very short introduction about the initiative itself. As Elisabeth mentioned, this initiative was created in 2016, right after the Paris Agreement was signed. What we wanted to do at the time, and still want to do, is to really provide targeted analytical assessment and help to our member countries and other partners on the effectiveness of different decarbonization measures. How we do it? We collect and share evidence of best practices. We also use our in-house models, our in-house quantitative evidence-based research to provide real numbers on how effective different measures are. But important also, and especially within the context of the ITF Summit, this initiative was also launched to shape the climate change debate by building a global policy dialogue. And one of the important things we saw already in the initial phases of this initiative was that the transport sector was not at the core of a lot of the discussions about climate change policies. And what we want to do is really bring the transport sector to the forefront of that debate. We have divided the work streams into 5 different work streams. We do progress tracking, so how far the current commitments, the NDCs that we have just seen revised, how far they will take us on our pathway towards zero carbon by 2050. We work on a lot of sectoral reports, sectoral analytics, identifying effective policies for each of the subsectors. But in addition to that, we have carried out already over the years several focus studies trying to understand specific decarbonization issues, such as impact on electrification, on tax revenues, impact of building lighter vehicles, etc., etc. So really trying to focus on specific questions. And on top of that, we want to develop pathway development. So we are helping our member countries, our regions, governments to build pathways that will help them meet their CO2 reduction ambitions. And again, the important part of that is also the policy dialogue. And part of that, what we're doing here today, is to organize and facilitate that dialogue that will help us all learn from each other and also as a sector bring these measures forward and effectively. All of that work is actually leading to our Transport Climate Action Directory as well, which is an online tool available to look at all the information and knowledge we've been building on this work. Again, as Elizabeth mentioned, today's focus will be much more on sort of a hard-to-abate sector, and I would like you to challenge that they're not hard to abate. Maybe you have a solution to tell it's possible. Do we need to change that title for the sectors? I'd be very interested to hear that. We'll be focusing specifically on road freight, maritime, and aviation. And this brings me to the current project that we've been working on, the hard-to-abate sectors. One of the feedback that we've received from our member countries and partners is that the work that we've been doing so far on the decarbonizing transportation is important. It's valuable. There's the effectiveness of measures. We need this evidence base. But what we also need is implementation support and concrete measures. How do we then implement these measures? What we need to do next? And that was sort of a birth of the major project that we are discussing here, is the Decarbonizing Transport Driving Implementation Action. In this, we have created 3 country-led common interest groups, fora, for a scaling up specific transport solutions for the hard-to-abate sectors. One on heavy-duty vehicles, one on shipping, and one on aviation. And we are extremely grateful for European Commission for funding this project that really goes beyond the European sphere. We have today in this project already over 30 implementing partners, and we with just the countries here that are already represented in these common interest groups. In addition to that, we are working with our private sector partners, with our industry partners, with sectoral organizations to really work together, finding concrete solutions that can be scaled up, not on a long term, but can be scaled up on a short and medium term, and putting us on that long-term pathway that we need for the transportation sector. So I would call this a real global coalition on climate change. This project is extremely valuable tool for that. And to finish my very short introduction, just to give highlights of the groups. So each of these country-led groups had several meetings and identifying what solutions, what questions we really want to focus on, where we see the opportunity, where we see that we can actually scale up the solutions within the medium term and going forward. So the focus group on aviation is really looking at sustainable aviation fuels and looking at cost, questions on scalability, and market readiness for SAF. And we're very happy Norway and Sweden are co-chairing this group, and we have our co-chair from Sweden in the panel here as well today. The heavy-duty freight, road freight transport group is looking at low-carbon vehicle technologies. As we all know, there are several thinking, what is the technology? What is the right technology? Sort of which one to choose, where to go? And really the focus on this group has been, how do we navigate this uncertainty and this technology neutrality, and what are the sort of solutions that we can believe already now that this is the way forward and we can start moving to that direction. And again, we're very happy for Netherlands and Argentina co-chairing, and again having in a panel our co-chair from Netherlands. So thank you for joining us. And the last one, and not least, is the shipping one, which is focusing on zero carbon fuels. And here the focus has been on cost of fuels, and particularly impacts of carbon pricing. This group is chaired by Spain. We don't have Spain here today for the chair, but we have our colleague Olaf Merck on the stage here, on the audience, and can definitely be speaking on that part as well. So that was my very short introduction. I do hope that we can really have an interesting debate, discussion on the hard-to-abate sectors, and again, maybe after this session, are we going to call it hard-to-abate, or at least less hard-to-abate? So I very much look forward to discussion and questions and answers from the audience as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jari. Thank you for this introduction to the DT initiative and our project on the hard-to-abate sectors. I would now like to welcome Davide Amato from the European Commission. He is Head of Sector Transition Analysis and Outreach at the Directorate General of Research and Innovation. David, over to you for an introduction of the European Green Deal.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Thank you very much for the invite. I bring the salute of my Director General, who couldn't be here today, and asked me to replace him in this meeting. The goal of my presentation indeed is to give you an overview of what the Commission is doing for decarbonizing transport. The focus, though, I'd like to give it is a bit more of an helicopter view of a policy framework in which we are operating, and then, of course, also explain to you a bit more concretely what we're doing in there from a policy side, but also from the research side. So let's start from the basis, and the basis for us is that climate change is a fact, environmental degradation is a fact, and we want to revert environmental degradation. We want to be climate neutral by 2050. That's the starting point for the European Union. So to do that, we have developed what we call the European Green Deal. The European Green Deal is a set of transformative policies and strategies that we have been working on for the past 2 years and a half, backed up by an important budget, with the goal of transforming our economy and our society, leaving no one behind. That's also a critical element of our approach. So the goal is really to be upfront, to be ready for 2050 and for also 2030. We have an intermediate target of cutting the emissions by 55% compared to 1990 levels by 2030. So that requires an unprecedented change in the way we work and in the changes that need to be brought to our society. So to do that, we started already by developing a set of strategies in most of the sectors we cover. I mean, not only transport, energy, food, industries, pollution, biodiversity. I mean, you name it, we touched them all. We developed strategies for each one of them. And on top of that, we also turned these strategies into law and our commitments into law. So the goal of 2050 climate neutrality has become what we call the climate law. And at the same time, we are changing our policies to get there. But I'll show you how. I mentioned the strategies. And of course, there is one for sustainable and smart mobility, which we launched already a few months after the European Green Deal. What I want to pass you as a message here is that this strategy, it's not abstract. It has very concrete measures. In particular, I want to mention the 10 flagships that we identified as really concrete targets to achieve the goal of net zero emissions for transport, which covers also hard-to-abate sectors. I mean, I'd like just to recall the goal of really flying, commercially flying, I mean, a zero-emission aircraft well before 2050. So that's a clear-cut goal that we have in our mind, and we're really working hard to get there, working with the public sector in Europe, but also working with the private sector. So another important message that I'd like to pass to you is that we are not alone in this journey. We cannot be alone in this journey. I mean, to get there, we have to act together. And that means Commission and Member States. It means Commission and private partners, but it means also Commission and international partners like you. I mean, the goal is too big to do it alone. So I was mentioning let's say, the legal aspects of it. And this is what we call the Fit for 55 package, which we launched last year. Fit for 55 refers to the 55% cut in emissions that I mentioned earlier. And to get there, we developed an unprecedented organic review of our regulations and directives in Europe. The goal is really to make all relevant regulations fit for this target and make sure that when we do the changes in one regulation, I mean, this is also reflected in connected regulations so that we are all going in the same direction. We want to do it with the view, of course, of ensuring the climate goals, but at the same time to make sure that the transition is socially and economically sustainable for the sectors and for the people that are living and working in Europe. At the same time, though, we do strongly believe that this transition will put European industry at a very competitive point, being, at the end of the day, carbon neutral, but at the same time less relying on non-renewable resources. So this is also a way to reach what we call strategic autonomy. I put on this slide some examples of this organic review. And as you can see, I mean, also for the transport sectors, we had targeted, important areas, especially in aviation and in fuels for aviation, in emissions for aviation, and not only for that, also for shipping. The point for us is to make sure that relevant pieces of legislation were updated to the new targets, and we're going in that direction. Now, the point, though, is, okay, legislation is good and it's fine, and this is something we can easily control. The question, though, is, are we ready? I mean, are we really fit for 55? Are we really fit for 2030? Are we there for 2050? Are the solutions available? Well, the answer is that yes, some of them are there. In some cases, it's a matter of legislation and imposing prices, targets, or incentives. But not all is there, not all is ready. So that's why this guy is here. I mean, it's also about research and innovation. So the role of research and innovation in the European Green Deal is that of being the key enabler of this transition. I mean, this transition without research, without innovation, wouldn't really happen. So to get there, I mean, to the 2050 targets, we see really research as a policy of opportunity. I mean, we can play a key role to drive the transition to our goals. So in concrete terms, what have we done? What are we doing? Well, first of all, we started already in 2020, soon after the launching of the European Green Deal, with a call dedicated to really bring available solutions really very close to the market. Just to give an example, a practical example, we had one of the topics about zero emission ports and airports. So the project has started, is already working, and in a few months we would already have a first report on the activities they are performing. At the same time, while launching Horizon Europe, we set below that 35% of Horizon Europe money will actually be spent on climate action activities. On top of that, we designed the work and the programmable part of Horizon Europe to make sure that the topics we draft really go in that direction. We have a set of partnerships, and I'll briefly touch upon that later, and the new Horizon Europe mission, at least 4 out of 5 of them, that really go in this direction. Important to mention in this regard is the Horizon Europe mission on cities, where the transport component will really be essential to meet the goal of 100 carbon neutral cities by 2030. And finally, the work of the new European Innovation Council that is there to help clean technologies to really reach the market faster. So, to give a bit more details, of course, the essential part for our constituency, I mean, in the transport sector, is in the cluster 5 on climate, energy, and mobility, where we design calls for proposal and topics for collaborative actions, especially in the hard-to-abate sectors. So you will find many topics on aviation, on maritime transport, in these, and also in freight, in this part of the program. For me, it's important to mention that by definition and by law, Horizon Europe is open to international participation. There are indeed some rules that link in a way with the status of our international partners. So to sum up, industrialized countries are not directly eligible for funding. However, with many of the industrialized countries, we have agreements by which their partners become automatically eligible for funding from the international partners themselves, whereas non-industrialized countries get 100% coverage of their costs directly by us. But it's not only about what we do in calls and topics, it's also about what we do with our partners. And here, I wanted to give you a brief and very helicopter view of the partnerships we have designed in Horizon Europe. There is a block of partnerships that directly address transportation and that specifically address the hard-to-abate sectors, in particular maritime transport and aviation. But it's not only about working in partnerships with our partners. It's also about creating an organic environment for the partnerships to operate in and to ensure synergies between and across partnerships. So, for instance, the work that is done in the hydrogen partnership, it's very much relevant for the hard-to-abate sectors, and we ensure contents and dialogues between these partnerships. And the same happens with the materials, with the upcoming CHIPS joint undertaking, as well as with the bio-based sector that can provide alternative materials to the oil-based ones, just to give you a couple of examples, of course. Important message to pass as well. I mean, in a few days, we are launching the so-called Driving Urban Transitions partnerships that will operate and focus more in the urban area, but that is also very much relevant for transport. So, to conclude on my side, and I think I'm almost on time, the message I wanted to pass you is that the Commission is really committed to these targets. We have designed our policies to be there in 2030 with an intermediate target, and then in 2050 with the climate neutrality target. We designed our programs as well to achieve these goals, so expect more of this in the upcoming research programs and calls. We are working with other colleagues in the Commission to make sure that the solutions that are tested and really get closer to the ground in Horizon Europe are then upscaled by other programs like the Connecting Europe facility, just to mention the obvious one, but also by the regional programs. And we are working with you colleagues, I mean with international partners, to make sure that we're not alone on this trip. I mean, this trip, it's really complicated. One, the transition is not obvious, and we can get there only if we work together. I stop here, and I pass you back the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Davide, for this overview of the European Green Deal, how it relates to transport, and also specifically that you have pointed out that it's not only the Green Deal that wants to achieve a just a transition to a low-carbon economy, but that this has to work also in a just way, in a fair way, which is obviously also the theme of today's session and the whole summit today. And this is also something that we want to highlight in our project on the hard-to-abate sectors. Not only that this just transition is important, but also that in order to get there and achieve this, we have to bring stakeholders from all different walks of life together, from all different kinds of sectors. And this is especially exactly what we are also doing in our so-called DT Implement project that we are working together with the European Commission on. So, and now before I turn to introduce finally the panel that has been impatiently waiting here to speak, a few more words from my side on the so-called hard-to-abate sectors to give you a bit of an impression of what they actually are and why they may be called hard-to-abate. So many of you will be aware that transport is responsible for around 1/4 of global energy-related CO2 emissions. And currently, around 40% of these emissions come from the so-called hard-to-abate sectors. And this is unfortunately set to increase. Not only the amount of this is set to increase from around 8 gigatons of CO2 to 9 gigatons CO2 in the time frame to 2050, but also the share within the transport sector emissions is set to increase to more than 50%. So clearly, it is very relevant to focus on these sectors. And I think focus has been a bit, well, falling short compared to other things. And my personal explanation is that we all talk about transport because we know it, because we're part of this, because we take our own trips, and we can always easily engage in discussions when we talk about passenger transport. And we always think about our own trip patterns, how we might change them, how we are able to change them, are willing to change them. But when we talk about freight transport, discussions obviously sometimes get a bit silent because people don't know so much about it and are not so sure how to deal with this and what the challenges actually are. So we're really trying to focus at the ITF currently on the freight sectors, on the hard-to-abate sector, to make sure that also this gains a bit of ground and people understand the importance of this and also what the actions are that can be supported in order to reduce CO2 emissions from these sectors. So kind of the knowledge, the awareness of the sectors probably contributes to the fact that we call them hard-to-abate, but also that mode shift in these sectors is not as easy because alternatives are a bit limited. When we talk about shipping freight around the world, alternatives are limited. When we talk about aviation covering long distances, alternatives may also be a bit limited. Furthermore, it also requires concerted decision-making because we're talking about international movements. And obviously, you have to bring many stakeholders aboard, not only within one region, one country, but around the globe. So this gets inherently difficult, probably, as we're seeing. And this is why progress may have been a bit slow compared to the passenger transport sector. And this is why maybe we really need to focus now on these sectors and try to catch up. But we will explore these questions a bit further with our panel now. And I want to think you all about the question, are hard-to-abate sectors really hard to abate compared to the passenger transport sector? Or maybe is it a bit less hard than we may be thinking, given the solutions that we will be hearing today? So I will come back to that question at the very end of the panel discussion with some panel members, but also with you, where I would like to have your opinion. So maybe you could think about this while you hear the panel discussion. At the end of the session, we see what you think. So now, finally, I want to introduce our distinguished panel members. Thank you so much for joining us today and for being here, for taking the time. We have 3 representatives from the corporate world. We have Matthias Metke, who is the Advocacy Director of the International Road Transport Union. Second. We have Julie Kitcher, Executive Vice President of Communications and Corporate Affairs from Airbus. Welcome. And we have Francisco Laberon, Head of Energy Perspective in the Innovation and Sustainability Division of Iberdrola. Welcome. And then we have 3 speakers that represent the civil service, the countries, the governments. We have Siddharth Sinha from NITI Aayog, that's the National Institution for Transforming India, where he advises the CEO on policy matters. He's an officer on special duty to the Chief Executive Officer. Thank you for coming and for the long way to get here today. We have Herman Sips, who is the lead of the Transport Decarbonisation Alliance at the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management. And very importantly, he currently also leads the work on the Global Memorandum of Understanding on Zero-Emission Freight that was initiated by the Netherlands. And as Jari introduced already before, he is also chairing our working group on the heavy-duty freight sector. Finally, we have Ingrid Sheffield. She is the Director of Strategic Development and Management at the Swedish Transport Agency. She was also the President of the European Civil Aviation Conference from 2014 to 2021. So if you have paid close attention, you will realize that we have 3 corporate representatives, we have 3 country representatives, and each of them represents one of the hard-to-abate sectors. Francisco, for you, it's a bit different maybe, but you can tell us more when you get to speak. Finally, I should maybe also introduce myself. I'm Elisabeth Windisch from the International Transport Forum, where I lead a team on policy analysis, and I'm the deputy of my boss, Jari, who you have heard just before. And I will be guiding you through the panel discussion. So I will take a seat for this to be closer to you. I actually want to start first with Ingrid. Let me ask you first. We have heard the initiatives from the European Commission to support the energy transition or decarbonization of the economy and also in transport specifically. Do you think that the Commission is doing enough on a regional level to support the energy transition and decarbonization of transport altogether, or maybe specifically in the aviation industry, in the aviation sector, from your point of view? Or is there maybe things that are missing, or is it now up to the countries to take action and follow the guidance of the European Commission? What is your view in terms of responsibility that has been taken on the regional and country level in Europe?
Well, thank you very much, Elisabeth, and good morning to everyone. Very happy to be with you here today. I think I'll start with the theme of the forum, transport for inclusive societies. And I think that we should bear in mind that transport is an essential enabler for economic and social growth that connects societies and also creates jobs. The recovery after the pandemic depends on efficient and sustainable transportation. And I think providing accessibility and connectivity safely and with minimum impact on the environment is something that we all strive to achieve. I think member states face different challenges. In Sweden, the government has taken several initiatives to address the necessary transition following the Paris Agreement and lately in the commitments with COP26. In Sweden, transport accounts for a third of the emissions, so we need to address this urgently. I think we can all agree on that. And the initiatives from the governments have focused on 3 main areas: increased transport efficiency, speeding up the transition to sustainable fuels, and more energy-efficient vehicles, ships, and aircrafts. And right now, my agency, together with other Swedish administrations, are working on additional measures, other measures, also to propose to the government for the next climate policy action plans to meet the Swedish net zero target by 2045. And it's very much focused on the overall governance and how it can contribute to achieve the milestone targets for domestic transport by 2030, but also the overall target by 2045. And its focuses on regulations and incentives, and no stones. We are looking at everything. No stone is unturned. I think it's very much in the hands of member states, of course, but I think we need to work together with all stakeholders to make it happen. Cooperation at the national, regional level in Europe, but also internationally with the upcoming ICAO Assembly, I think will be very critical to meet these ambitious goals. I think also we should not underestimate the opportunities that this also creates in terms of job opportunities, new business models, and also for the economy. And I think we can all share our experience and learn from each other. I think that is a great opportunity for us. I think that the one thing I would like to highlight is risk management. We have heard it in different panels yesterday. I think we are pushing boundaries in technical innovation, not only from big industries like Airbus and others, but also we have newcomers, startups that are also pushing boundaries. Innovation comes at a high cost, and we really need to make sure that we have a public-private partnership to make this happen. Otherwise, progress will be very slow. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I guess our European Commission representative, David, will be glad to hear that you mentioned it's more up to the member states now than pushing the responsibility back to the regional level. But you did emphasize the international cooperation, how important this is and how important it is that we all pull at the same string. Would you agree to this, Herman, maybe from the Netherlands perspective, or are there other points that you would like to make in this respect?
Good morning. Maybe a few reflections, because I feel we need probably both. So it's not either or, and I agree definitely with Ingrid, and I'll come to that in a minute, that we also need something globally. But to say at national level, I think obviously governments need to put incentives in place, need to be clear about their ambition, and need to put the enablers in place. And just as an illustration, the Netherlands just recently launched a subsidy scheme for zero-emission freight vehicles. 14 million euros in that pot. Within one day, it was 35 million applications. So there is a big appetite. Clearly shows that more can be done and more should be done. So that's one of the things we need to do at national level. At the regional, so the EU level, I was confused about the regional, but Europe is a region after all. I think we sort of, we're still waiting to see if the Commission is going to do enough this year. Clearly, there is a proposal out to get the infrastructure right. That is under debate now. And we would very much hope that within that proposal, the ambition for charging infrastructure for zero-emission freight matches with the necessary ambition for that sector in terms of the norms and standards. But that norms and standards bit will only come out at the end of the year. So is the Commission going to do enough? We don't know. I think after summer we will find out. So crucial action on that point, revision of the standards. We feel that they should be ambitious, they should be in line with the Paris Agreement, they should be in line with the Fit for 55 package. And I think much in that domain is possible because many of the car manufacturers are basically telling us that they're ready to move ahead and be ambitious. Then globally, maybe one word on that, no surprise probably, as the global MOU was already mentioned, we feel we also need to work together collectively. That's why the Netherlands, together with Karlstad, launched a global MOU on zero-emission freight, where the countries signing that MOU, and Portugal just joined yesterday, basically say by 2030 we want 30% of all new sales to be zero emission, and by 2040 we want 100% of all sales to be zero emission. And I think that that collective resolve is very crucial as well. So please join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Herman. Good. So we have a point of view from the European Commission side, from specific member states. Now maybe it's worth going to Siddharth to see whether he has something to contribute and what, well, let us know maybe first what the challenges of India are in the hard-to-abate sectors and what India is doing in order to try decarbonize the hard-to-abate sector specifically.
Thanks a lot, Elizabeth, for that question. Of course, it was wonderful hearing this. But before that, I think I need to congratulate ITF for getting so many stakeholders on board, at this summit, and it's really nice. And this conversation on decarbonizing couldn't have been coming at a time better than this, because prior to this discussion, we were just talking about how temperatures in New Delhi, which is where I come from, they've touched 49.5 degrees Celsius, and this has never happened before. So we're witnessing extremes, and freight, the hard-to-abate sectors, of course, is one of the major challenges in terms of transportation. So India, I think one of the challenges that we have is 90% of the emissions within the transport sector actually come from the road segment. And within the road segment, 70% of our freight actually gets carried by road transportation. So the first priority for us is actually to decarbonize this segment. And how do we do that? We are trying to ensure that this entire modal sort of share of railways actually increases, where there's a transition from roadways to the railways, because our railways have committed to going net zero by 2030. So Indian Railways will go net zero by 2030, which is quite an interesting development because our railway network is absolutely huge. And if we are actually able to do this by 2030, that would be a big achievement for India. And what we've done is that we've started building high-speed, dedicated freight corridors within the country. So we've already completed 4,000 kilometers of dedicated freight corridors in our country. And we will have 10 more such corridors. So you can expect a lot of modal share to actually shift to the railways. And secondly, of course, we are also trying to, we're working to create an enabling environment for the sustainable aviation fuels ecosystem in India. So every year, we produce 160 million tons of feedstock every year, which mostly gets burned or wasted, which is also one of the reasons for pollution in the country. And we are trying to create a facilitative policy framework, and we're very happy that the industry has been on board with this. In fact, Airbus, Julie, you would know that Indigo, which is one of our airlines, actually made the first SAF flight from Toulouse to New Delhi, just a couple of days ago. And I think, finally, a new model that we are trying to explore is, can we use semi-high-speed rail links between cities, which, for instance, the ICE in Germany, the equivalent of that in India would be the RRTS projects. Can we actually use passenger transport in the non-peak hours to actually transport freight? And in the next 2 years, we'll be completing the first project where we are going to be using passenger-based rails to transport freight during non-peak hours between cities. So this would be some of the things that we are trying to do, at least on our front in India.
Perfect. Thank you for this brief overview of India's actions. You touched upon the importance of road freight, especially in India. Maybe this gives us a good transition to our next panelist, Matthias Metje from the International Road Union. Can you tell us a bit more from your experience? What is your sector doing in order to decarbonize transport? And also, please point out the specific challenges that you still think exist, maybe with a view to policymakers and how they could support whatever these challenges are to overcome them.
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth, with pleasure. So I'm taking a more global perspective here and would like to react to a few things that I've heard. And it's great to have you here because you will really have to look at the different perspectives. Europe is just accounting for 10% of the bill, right? And India is a major player. And road transport is a means of driving the economy, of filling people's stomachs, and driving a prosperous economy as well. Intermodality is key, but I would like to, Elizabeth, just shed some light on what you introduced to in terms of the responsibility we have to shoulder as an industry. In the road transport sector, globally speaking, 75% of the emissions come from private passenger cars. So Yari said, is it a hard-to-abate sector? I would say the hard-to-abate sector is private mobility. So you need a different mobility behavior because we account for 25% of that. It's still something that we have to shoulder, but it's just important to take that perspective into account. And I mentioned that Europe is accountable for 10%. Look what the Ukraine war is doing to the topic, and maybe you're not aware, but 2 weeks ago, the Eurasian Economic Commission has scrapped environmental standards in Eurasia because sanctions lead to no ability of having important components to even produce Euro 5 vehicles. So in reality, not far from here, you have now brand new Euro 0 trucks being put in the market. And you talk about zero emission in another part of the world, meaning here in Europe. So it's just an interesting perspective, isn't it? And it shows how crazy the discussion is. And I would also like to provoke and pick up on what David has said before I come to the solution. And I know we have more time in the panel. And I know you're not the person to address this to, Davide. You're not the policy person. But the European Commission has never been technology neutral because you link zero emission to a technology choice. The ITF is forecasting, as we learned yesterday, that our growth in road transport will be twice as high, so the market will at least double by 2050. I just was you flew in from Doha, right? I was in Doha last week, and when I told them about, the ITF said, and it was triple, double, whatever, they said, no, it will grow much, much more in our region. So it's a matter of perspective. And road transport will grow, and we are competing against other sectors. You need renewables everywhere. So where is that coming from? And let's not be fooled. It sounds very good from a policymaker perspective to say we have to accelerate. But where is the energy coming from? And we believe that introducing and closing the borders basically with something like CBAM, the Carbon Border and Adjustment Mechanism, that's not going to help. If the EU would look for CBAM as a means to decarbonize, the impact will be close to zero. You have to coordinate and create a global club between China, North America, India, the EU to make it work and to make it happen. And ironically, because of the demand in road transport that we will see in the next years and decades to come, how are we supposed to cover that with renewables? This demand means that more fuels and energy being used will be fossil, and that's a fact. So we need to, by all means, diversify as much as possible and not stop doing diesel and just do batteries tomorrow. So here there is a perspective that you have to look at. And we have, as IRU, come up with a pledge, a green compact to go to net zero emissions by 2050. It builds on 5 strategic pillars. And we're working with the ITF. Evidence is good. We need more evidence. We want to know. Of course, it's about low carbon and zero carbon fuels and technologies, but it's about also efficiency of logistics. Can we use longer, heavier vehicles? We would like to reduce, actually, the truck fleet by 1/3 if we just used more eco trucks. We would like to see more collective mobility solutions. We would like to improve the fleet renewal rate, right? Let's not forget when Sweden or Netherlands put their trucks out of service, and they're rich countries, and we talk about 2 or 3 years. You don't have to look far, by the way. In Greece, a truck is 20 years old. But all these vehicles, and if we put more electric vehicles in the market, will go to, for example, India. Will they have the infrastructure? Will they have the ability to run these vehicles? So we need to be much smarter and create, also what we want to investigate in our Green Compact, how will the global sustainable second-hand vehicle market look like? And did you know that you can even reduce CO2 by 10% if we just invested a bit more in driver training and education and driving behavior? So there are low-hanging fruits. And policymakers need to be aware of that. And you could, ironically, and I stop there to provoke some discussion, say, isn't that the moment where you should also review and reconsider your so-called zero-emission pathways, when actually it is also more fossil electricity that you will have to produce, particularly in these challenging times. So we need to be very, very smart. And Jari said, you know, the initiative's growing, but with the initiative growing, the questions are growing too.
That's certainly right. I hope we find some answers to the questions that are rising and getting bigger and bigger.
Elizabeth, if I may, just as a last
yes.
sentence, don't forget the fuel crisis and what happens today. We are losing 10% on our profit margin. Normally we make 3 or 4, but now we're losing. For every road transport operation, we put money on the table on top. So we lose money. It drives companies into bankruptcy. So how are we supposed to make investments if there are no incentives? I'm very grateful for the comment from Netherlands as well that, you know, incentives are key. But mind you, this is critical, and it's a global crisis. India is not impacted by the fuel price. We know, it's a reality, but you have other challenges, as you said. But let's not forget about that.
Thank you, Matthias. You touched upon energy, obviously, a lot, and where is this coming from? Where are all the renewables coming from that we may need? I think this may be a good transition to you, Francisco. Maybe you have some answers to these questions. You're coming from Iberdrola, electric utility. Do you have the answers? Can you provide us and scale up your energy provision to the levels that we may be needing in the near future?
Well, not all the answers, but first of all, thank you for inviting me to this forum. I mean, the first thing that we are doing to provide energy is investing very heavily in renewable energy. Basically renewable electricity. We are also starting to invest in green hydrogen to produce for harder to abate sectors. I mean, one thing that is interesting is that right now, in around 70 or 80% of the world, the cheapest way to produce electricity is with renewables, and that is important because renewables are suffering or are experiencing a huge transformation, a huge revolution, especially in cost reduction. With this renewable electricity and with green hydrogen, we can decarbonize around 80% of the economy, and basically almost all the light-duty vehicles, also trucks, maritime also, and aviation, that is probably the most difficult one. We are also investing quite heavily in charging infrastructure. I mean, we have the target to have around 150,000 charging points in 2-3 years from now. And most of this will go to light-duty vehicles. I mean, we are trying to invest also in charging infrastructure for trucks, but now it's difficult because there are no trucks in the roads and because the business model is not here. I mean, it's quite expensive now. But I think that we can provide all that energy. I will just give you an example. I mean, if we take all the transport in Spain and convert it to electric vehicles, I mean, the electricity demand would grow in Spain around 20-30%. And this should be done in 20-30 years. In Spain, from 1997 to 2007, in just 10 years, that is 10 years that we grew a lot, electricity demand grew by 60%. So if we can, increase the production 60% in 10 years, we can do it 30% in 30 years. So I think that this will be available and this will be cheaper than fossil fuels.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, if you...
what happens in the next couple of years? I mean, if you force a switch to electricity faster, how would we, what will be the energy price for a transport operator, for example?
I mean, I cannot give you the number for a transport operator, but what we can assume, I mean, from our point of view, I mean, the electricity sector is used to give the demand that consumers ask for. So we have been doing this for more than 100 years. And I told you that in 10 years we can increase our electricity production and the networks by 60%, and nobody noticed. And if you had a new factory, I mean, nobody worried about electricity supply. We just developed infrastructure and the generation facilities. So we are very used to that. The issue is that government or regulators must be aware that we have to integrate all that growth in our planning, in our generation and network planning. Permitting is a bottleneck, a clear bottleneck. But I mean, it's just a matter of have clear targets and to work towards that. And from our analysis, electric vehicles, even for trucks, will be cheaper than fossil fuels.
Okay, thank you. I'm a bit relieved now after a response that there seems to be some hope. Now, coming to you, Julie, what is your view on where the energy should come from? Obviously, also the aviation sector is struggling with this, as there are not so many alternatives to aviation, especially not to long-distance aviation. Please let us know what Airbus is doing and where you see the specific challenges.
So thank you very much. Hello, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here and amongst such a good panel of experts too. So thanks for the opportunity. I think, we've heard from many on the panel now. Transportation is a solution to the problem and not the problem. And I think, our view is, and Ingrid talked about, the fact that the sector brings social and economic development. It drives prosperity, connectivity, and it shouldn't be an arbitration between the transportation sectors. All of the sectors we're discussing today are required. And without transportation, without aviation, in the case of Airbus and the aviation industry, we cannot have global prosperity. In a world of growing globalization, and we need that prosperity to drive this wide-scale transformation that's required. It's going to require significant investment, financial investment, and from everywhere, and it's going to require really wide-scale collaboration, coordination, partnership, probably in an unprecedented way, and we've not seen that at this scale. So with respect to the aviation sector, actually the entire sector has rallied around a net zero carbon by 2050. So I think that's extremely promising. It's airlines, it's aircraft and engine OEMs, it's airports, air navigation services. So it's really a sectorial commitment, which is, from my perspective, it gives me a huge amount of optimism that we can get there, that we're tackling the issues. And to get there, we have a roadmap really around 4 main levers. The first one is technology and innovation. And maybe just to put it into perspective, only 12% of the world's aircraft fleet today is flying with the latest aircraft technology. So fleet renewal is the first key lever to drive down CO2 emissions. And so that's just to help with every new generation of aircraft developed. It improves fuel efficiency and therefore CO2 emissions by around 20 to 25%. So the aircraft that Airbus has in the backlog today are based on the latest generation of technology. And as we deliver those aircraft, as we retire older aircraft, the CO2 emissions are reduced, enabling the growth. So significant improvement already has come over the last decades by that technology improvement. And so we continue as well to develop technologies and innovation for the future. The second key pillar is really energy. So energy pathways, and it's an and. So there's not one single solution. We need to develop sustainable aviation fuel on a wide scale. And we need to develop hydrogen pathway. And ultimately, we need hydrogen to create synthetic fuels. So we really need to develop both. Today, aircraft can have a drop-through, a mix between sustainable aviation fuel and kerosene by 50%. So the technology flying today can take up to 50% of that sustainable aviation fuel mix. But the reality is it's less than 1% today because we don't have access to wide-scale sustainable aviation fuel. And as a consequence, the cost is extremely high. So we also need to build or break this vicious circle with respect to a limited demand, so a limited pull, therefore a limited supply, to really create a much more economic model with respect to sustainable aviation fuel and develop hydrogen pathways for other transportation sectors as well, and to enable us to develop hydrogen for the future. So that is going to, we come back to wide-scale investment again. The third is with respect to air transport management operations, further improving the airline operations today. Depending on the airline, we can see a potential for CO2 improvement of around 10%, depending on the airline operation. But with respect to flying trajectories, for example, single European sky is really in the heart of that. And of course, we've heard it, it's a global industry. We need a global level playing field with respect to regulations. Yes, we need to be supported on a national level. We need to be supported on a European level. And we also need to have a global solution that means that we don't have different competition levels throughout the globe. So I would say what we really require is the triangulation between technology, energy transformation, and regulation. So yes, it's complex, but I think we have all the levers to get there.
Okay, thank you, Julie. I think you provide a very nice overview of what could be done in the aviation sector. Maybe I'm turning now back to the policymakers' side. I think a lot of interesting things have been said. Maybe you want to pick up on a few of these things, but also please feel free to let us know what maybe specific learnings for you were also from chairing these groups within the ITF or working group framework of this DT Implement project. What are any surprises for you in terms of what other policymakers from other countries want, where there are disparities maybe between different regions or different stakeholders? what were your insights? And maybe I will put the next question on you immediately as well. Please highlight from your point of view the opportunities you see as well, because I think we all have these challenges mind frame much too often when we talk about decarbonizing transport. But what are the opportunities, or what are actually the risks if we do not move quick enough? Maybe Herman, you go first this time.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And maybe to put out a different perspective than Matthias, also for the sake of argument, and not only for the sake of argument. I think what I learned from chairing the group and listening and talking to others and leading the global MOU is maybe the vastness of the opportunity. Where, and this is a spoiler, so sorry, but where indeed maybe a few years back, sort of the freight sector was considered to be hard to abate. I think by now we know it can be done. It's not a done deal, you have to work on it, but technology is shaping up, we know, and ITF has done great modeling work on this as well. So even for 3 options, right, you have hydrogen, you've got battery electric, and you've electric road systems, so there is options to choose from. They're all shaping up. They will all sort of be cost competitive somewhere in the early sort of years of the next decade. So there is a lot for the market then to pick up on. So, and that's a great opportunity, first and foremost, that we can sort of build on. And in that sense, it is a technology neutral sort of thing, because in the end, once they become cost competitive, it's for the market to choose. But it will drive down the costs, and it will be cheaper for operators to operate these fleets. And it will be cheaper compared to diesel. So very soon, I think the market will sort that issue out. And if then the fleet renewal is sort of 10 years later, it takes about 10 years, if I understand correctly, then 10 years later, these vehicles will reach emerging markets. So again, you need to do that decently. You need to look at sort of export standards, not to send the junk from Europe, and apologies for the undiplomatic phrasing, to emerging markets or to Africa or elsewhere. So you need to work on those kind of issues. But all in all, I would say, it's in our hands. We can do this. There will be a critical issue around charging infrastructure. Maybe that is the next frontier. And it's not so much the technology or the affordability. Maybe where the affordability comes in, and I think that's why we have the incentive schemes in the Netherlands, I think is probably you need to take a closer look, how does this play out for smaller companies who run small fleets, because even if the total cost of ownership sort of matters and is okay over the lifespan, you still have the high upfront investment costs, and you need to find a solution for that. But I think our toolbox, we know the ingredients, and it's basically up for us now to sort of do the cooking and present a meal. And in my view, it's a very attractive meal. Thank you.
Thank you. Ingrid, would you like to chime in on this and let us know if you have reactions to the other speakers' points and what your learnings have been so far?
Yes, thank you very much. I just picked up on certain points that were mentioned earlier. I think you mentioned different behavior and different mobility, and I think there are things that can be done already today and are being done. You mentioned driver behavior. That is something that we have worked in Sweden and have gotten real good results. So I think we should aim high, but we should not forget the low-hanging fruits that we can work on already today. So I fully agree with you. There are things that we can do.
That's also very positive.
But we are still working on different issues. I also welcome your point you made on operations, because I think we tend to forget this huge opportunity, especially when we're discussing in Europe the single European skies and measures also that we can take in that domain. I think there is much that can be done there as well in air traffic management. Well, I think in the group where I'm in, we together see my co-chair, Jan Peter Steinlein from Norway in the audience. We have decided to, together with the industry, to focus on SAF, as it is the most efficient measure to reduce aviation emission in a short mid-term. It is already available today. It's compatible with the aircraft fleet and with the airport infrastructure. And you mentioned it, the huge challenge we face is to ramp up the production and also the deployment of SAF. And that is something that we really need to focus on in the work ahead. I wouldn't say that I've been much surprised with discussions within our group. I think we have very good discussions. I think we share the common views and the common goals in order to make this happen and to meet the ambition goals. I think what we have discussed also is that we have regions, I think Europe and US are front runners. And we should also make sure that no country is left behind. And I think we are all working in a global environment, and I think we should have that perspective in mind. And that's why we're interacting with different regions. I think India is a very active part in those discussions, but we're also trying to involve other regions. I think it is very important that we have a global perspective to this. And that's why the upcoming ICAO Aviation Assembly later this year will be very decisive and critical to meet the ambition goals. And I think that we member states have a responsibility to really work together. We have been successful, I think, in the past. I'm remembering the difficult discussions we had on CORSIA for many years until we managed to reach an agreement. And I think if you look at the commitments also from different member states, from different regions, on the voluntary commitment, you see that there is a high commitment to really work together on a global perspective. Because the danger is we're not going to stop. If we don't find the global agreement, we will have different patchwork at the regional level, and that benefits no one. So I think we need to work together in order to reach a higher level of agreement within the ICAO, and the next assembly will be very decisive. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, you pointed to India now. Maybe this is the best transition to now. So ask India, Siddharth, obviously, sorry. From what you've heard so far, do you think there is a specific thing that could be transferable from Europe to India, or rather the other way around? Because we always think that we need to transfer something to the global south, but maybe there are many solutions already there that we could learn from India, or more broadly the global south.
No, I think this time it'll work the other way around. So I'd talk about some learnings from India, and I think because we touched upon charging infrastructure, we also spoke about green hydrogen. So in that context also, so for instance, just a couple of days ago, India actually launched the largest tender for e-buses, one of the largest in the world, where we actually procured 5,500 electric buses, which are not going to be owned by the government. They're going to be, on a wet lease agreement. And this is probably one of the biggest tenders in the world. But having said that, I do not believe that e-mobility is the silver bullet that we believe that should be the answer to all our problems. Because then the question is that if we decide to power entire countries, electric mobility, just bring it throughout countries, as you pointed out, do we really have the energy to actually sort of do it? Which is why green hydrogen is perhaps a very, very interesting proposition. India has already launched the National Green Hydrogen Mission, and there has been great interest both domestically, internationally. Domestic players have announced major capacity additions to green hydrogen. And I think where the learning from in India is in terms of how you can successfully sort of leverage renewables, right? Because hydrogen, the major aspect is the cost which is associated with the energy, right? And over here, the challenge is the high cost, of relatively high cost of renewable energy. In India, we've been able to make renewable energy available at 2 rupees per unit, which translates to 0.02 euros per unit of renewable energy. And our target was to complete about 38% solar by 2030, but I think by 2027, we will have 38% coming in from solar. So I would say that what we need to work on or synergize is how really, once we start, there's a full-fledged focus on sort of green hydrogen is the way forward. How do we bring down the cost of energy, and how do we use sort of renewables to do that? Because if we can do this in India, I'm sure it can be very easily be replicated elsewhere as well. But I also very strongly believe that the future lies in a good mix of hydrogen and batteries, because with hard to abate sectors, as the size of the vehicle increases, the size of your battery also increases, and you can't power everything with batteries. So, and that is why green hydrogen is very, very important in that sense, especially for the hard to abate sectors.
Okay, thank you. Matthias, I think you wanted to come in already a few times.
I couldn't agree more, Siddharth. Thank you, because it's not only about, so what you should give to others, like in Europe, is really your sun, and turn, I mean, I know you're suffering from a terrible heat wave, but you know, we had at the General Assembly of IRU very recently, a few days back, the IEA talking to us as well. And when you listen to something that Mr. Birol, the Director General, said, that a country like Belgium, I lived there for some time, yeah, and I think it's literally raining for more than half of the year, correct me if I'm wrong, but a country like Belgium last year has produced more solar and electricity, or electricity from solar, than the entire sub-Saharan in the world, okay? Is that logical? So basically, to make the point, it has no impact. Invest where it makes sense. Last week in Doha, I saw the largest electric bus fleet out of China for the World Cup. Impressive. All powered by renewable electricity. That makes sense? We have 65 million heavy vehicles driving on the roads every day today. Heavy, yeah? And we buy every day, as an industry, 10,000 new trucks. And I just mentioned that there are even Euro 2, Euro 0, Euro 3. State of the art is Euro 5 in Latin America still, you know. So we're not even close to converting the world to a complete new technology. So what do we do with the existing vehicles? And that's why we need also to listen to Airbus and cooperate. The debate on leave all the e-fuels to aviation and nothing for trucking, that's very short-sighted. Because in our industry, it all depends on the law of physics. You have international transport, you have regional transport. Countries like India, you have long distances to cover. You have on the EU-China corridors, rail is growing, and that's good. But also rail is not able to cope with all the demand. And multimodality is key. You need fuels that also have higher energy content. As long as you can store 120 times more energy in 1 liter of diesel versus 1 kilowatt hour of battery cells. Mind you, 120 times more. It's a fact. Hydrogen is great because it has a higher energy content, but it has a very poor energy density. So also there you have to make a compromise. Or why do you think we are driving with diesel? It's from an operational point of view, simply the best fuel. So you have to make things that come close to that. That's why you have LNG trucks, for example, yeah? So do bio-LNG trucks. Volvo is doing also LNG trucks, not only electric. Use biodiesel, yeah? Sustainably produced. That's a smart way of doing it. And maybe if I may, Elizabeth, a few days back, car OEMs gave quite a sinister outlook on the sales of battery electric vehicles because of our supply chain issues and because of the issues to have access to rare earth materials. So they have to downgrade their forecasts. And now we talk trucks and heavy vehicles where the battery is 10 times larger than in a car, mind you. So it's just a reality, and that's what we mean by let's be smart, let's sit down together, let's discuss that together and analyze where decarbonization can actively happen. In the EU, you have an internal market, but the world has to cross borders. We're also the implementing partner for the United Nations of a transit guarantee called TIR, International Road Transport. I was at the Capicule border crossing between Turkey and Bulgaria. 1,000 trucks going in each direction every day, average waiting time at the border, idling engines, 2 days. Without all the COVID restrictions. Because of COVID and lack of border and government coordination, we had average waiting times of 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks. And this is a reality. So if governments would start to work together and also fix their border issues, drive digitalization, implement international conventions, we are very, very short-sighted when we talk about decarbonization. It's not about the vehicle or the fuel. It's a production tool. Like an aircraft, a truck is a production tool. So we have to decarbonize and we need green fuels. But we also need to bear in mind that this is a production tool for society, and there are so many low-hanging fruits that, again, IRU wants to investigate together with you in our Green Compact, because it's also a study that we want to contribute to basically point policymakers' attention to what is possible. You can replace 500 million cars with just 16 million buses and coaches. 500 million. That's 1/3 of the global car fleet. 20% of the emissions gone. You can extend the trailer length by 5 meters and add a little bit of a tonnage. 25% of the emissions gone, just like that. Half of the problem solved, nearly. So that is what we have to talk about. And it's much more complex, I'm afraid. But of course, Hermann, electrification, it's a reality. I said, I saw the fleet last week, but it's just one, and I would even say, small piece of the puzzle.
Julie, what would you have to say to that? I think there's many points that you brought, obviously, and I would personally have a lot of questions, but obviously it's for you to discuss among yourselves more than me asking questions.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we can debate prioritization within hard-to-abate sectors and come with different perspectives. What I would say, and what is, growingly apparent, is that we need, there are no borders to this sector. We need to break them down. We need really, I'm sorry to say it again, we need a level playing field of a framework, and that's why the long-term aspirational goals, ICAO this year is absolutely vital for our industry to really support those long-term aspirational goals and mobilize the entire sector to be able to ensure that can happen. Yeah. I think we also have a tendency to forget that Europe is really relatively advanced compared to other regions in terms of the progress that's been made. And so we need to make sure that we're tackling the questions, in a fair way. And really looking to other areas for solutions. Sustainable aviation fuel, I'm very optimistic in terms of the collaboration with India. And I think, the potential for renewables is vast. So we can learn a lot of lessons by looking up and looking across borders. I also think transparency is key, and I think, we're talking about climate science. So, the SBTI initiatives and being able to really measure tangible progress is absolutely key. And, the great thing is we all sound pretty much aligned in terms of what has to happen. Now we need to turn it into actionable objectives to really deliver against the commitments that we make and the objectives that we set. And that action is now key, because 2030 still sounds like we have time, but the decision making, the investment, the policy making, that starts today to make sure we can get there.
Thank you. Well, I think one common ground of all of you is definitely that we need a lot of renewable energy if possible. So turning to you, Francisco, what is Iberdrola's stance in terms of, are you focusing more on hydrogen? Are you thinking that the future will be more on direct electrification of the road transport? Do you have a view of what the future will look like, and therefore align your strategies and targets already accordingly?
Well, we don't have a very deep knowledge of certain sectors. These people are much more knowledgeable than I am. What I can share is our experience in the electricity sector. We are, as I said before, we are experiencing a huge technology revolution in renewable energies. PV is extremely cheap. Wind also is very cheap. Now we are seeing offshore wind that will extend all over the place, and this is huge potential everywhere in the world. We are the first wind developer private developer in the world, except the Chinese companies, and every 2 years we do an analysis of future cost of wind energy, and every 2 years we are surprised because things are moving faster than expected, and that is very important. So another issue is batteries. Batteries is the same. They are experiencing a huge reduction in cost, and they will be this will be the same in the future. A little bit slower, but it will be the same. Regarding minerals and metals and all that, I think that everybody is analyzing that. The International Energy Agency, we have also universities like the MIT, private companies, and there is a challenge to scale up some minerals, but I think it's just a challenge. It shouldn't be a problem if it's managed in a correct way. Hydrogen will experience also a quick reduction in cost, but hydrogen has some problems. I mean, the first one is energy density. The second problem is efficiency. I mean, an electric vehicle is twice as efficient as a hydrogen vehicle. So every time you can decarbonize with batteries is much better. So you will use hydrogen only where you cannot use batteries. I mean, you can go from Madrid to Berlin in a truck with a 100 kilometer range because you have to stop every 4 hours. And every 4 hours, if you can charge the battery, you will use a battery electric vehicle. You will not use a hydrogen vehicle. So in Europe, I don't see many hydrogen vehicles because we have a robust electricity grid and we will have a robust electricity charging network for trucks. In other countries like, I don't know, Australia, the US, in India, you will have a higher share of hydrogen, but from my point of view, even for heavy-duty trucks, battery is the solution where you have enough electricity networks.
Okay, thank you. Julie, please.
May I just add, yeah, it's slightly more challenging, obviously, in aircraft. So this is where we really need to work on the two energy pathways and to develop the hydrogen technology, the infrastructure, distribution systems, storage, regulations. So the challenge is quite substantial, I would say, but an essential one.
It's the same, I mean, not the same, but it's similar to maritime. Maritime, it will decarbonize through methanol coming from green hydrogen or with ammonia coming from green hydrogen. So, yeah, in maritime and aviation is different.
Thank you. Francisco, maybe let's stay with you. Quickly, one question. If you had one wish to policymakers, one demand that would make your life easier at Iberdrola, would make the life of Iberdrola easier in order to scale electricity quicker and faster and more than is currently happening, what would it be?
I mean, clearly, I think it's permitting to have a faster process of permitting. So administration must simplify all the permitting processes, and they should also get enough resources to do all the paperwork in a quick way. I mean, this is true for electricity, this is true for charging infrastructure, this is true for everything.
Makes sense, thank you. And Julie, same question to you. If there were one major, we have heard loads of things, I think, from you in terms of what could or should be done, but if there were just one thing that you were allowed to mention.
Yeah, I think we need the adoption of the long-term goals at the ICAO Assembly, and really the creation of this level playing field.
Okay, thank you. And Matthias, from your point of view?
Yeah, thank you, Elisabeth. Continue to work based on evidence. I mean, nobody argues about the efficiency of the engine. The problem is just it needs a catenary wire. If you put a battery, which is not a good tank because of the low energy density, you need large batteries. And then you need to talk about circular economy. So a medium-range truck has the production of the battery will result in 50 tons of CO2. That's the amount of a diesel truck running 100,000 kilometers. Me being alive 1 year is 11 tons of CO2. So it's a matter of perspective, and it's a bit more complicated. Let's use the evidence, use existing and expedite decarbonization by using existing technologies, because we have to start today, as you said, and not in 10 years or in 15 years or whatever research will give us, and convince policymakers to put the right business incentives in place to support this evidence-based technological evolution.
Okay, thank you. Then, having heard this, maybe we turn back to the policymakers and ask now the final question that is also a question that I will ask the audience. Now, having heard all this and after this discussion, how hard are the hard-to-abate sectors actually to abate? I think we need to agree that all subsectors in transport are hard to abate, otherwise we would have done it already. But so the question is more like, are they harder to abate than passenger transport sectors? In urban areas or long-distance passenger traffic on the land? What is your view, Siddharth?
Well, I would obviously sort of agree with what Matthias said, that it's incorrect to just, label one part of transportation. Sure, hard to abate is fine, but, it's more difficult to change the characteristics or the behavioral sort of, the behavioral change that is required. It's more difficult to sort of push through in cities, interestingly. And if you take within city emissions, of course, freight is a very small part of it then. It's mostly coming from, it's mostly coming from the passenger vehicles, mostly from the passenger fleet, right? And we've not been able to crack that so far. So that obviously should become, it's just that we've created a definition for the hard to abate sectors, which surely I agree with. I don't have a problem with that. But, it cannot be, these two segments cannot be competing with each other where one is made to look as if, oh, this is an easier bit. No, I think everything technically, in order to achieve it, is easy. It just requires will and collaboration. And I think one of the things that I would specifically like to stress on is the fact that you don't need just financial incentives. So when you ask me that question, if there's something that can be learned from us, and it's not just the West, I would say, it's for all developing countries, and it's not something that the West actually needs to learn from us, but mostly for the developing countries. One thing that we noticed and we had great success with is just being able to sort of change things based on a small behavioral element. So for instance, when states were notifying their electric vehicle policies or clean mobility policies, we would start ranking states. Now we are a large federal structure. And what automatically happens is that if you go out as the federal government and say, oh look, these are the top 5 runners in the clean mobility ecosystem in India, it really sets the wheels in motions in all those other states as well, and they jump in as well. So that's what we did with clean mobility, and we originally had 5 states. Today we have 25 states who've already notified their e-vehicle policy. And that's it. There's no financial incentive involved over here. And we had, it's not related, but the most successful example of that is what we did in the Aspirational Districts program in India, not related to mobility, but it can be applied to mobility. These were the most backward districts in India in terms of their socio-economic indicators. And all that we did was that we started a ranking exercise. We said that we'll rank you based on the efforts that you make to change yourselves. Today, UNDP says that these aspirational districts, or the backward districts as they were earlier called, are better performing than the rest of the districts of India. And the same can be applied to e-mobility as well, in terms of pushing states where there's a federal structure to sort of make those changes out there.
Okay, thank you. It sounds very optimistic again. Ingrid and Herman, what are your thoughts on, are the hard to abate sectors really harder to abate than other sectors?
I would sort of like to relabel the sort of freight sort of sector to maybe ready to abate. Because, Matthias was talking about evidence, but I think the evidence is out there in that sense that, early next decade, technology-wise, cost-wise, there is far more options to start sort of driving sort of the transformation. And I think we can, if we put the right incentives in place, if we voice the right ambitions, and it comes back to my first point in the European context, a strong revision of the European standards, a strong cooperation, hopefully, so please join us, globally to send that signal. But because there is it's not the cost, it's not the technology, it's probably in the enablers to put that in place. And then, I think it is, so it's ready to abate, avoiding whether it's easy or whether it's hard. It's not a done deal, that's obvious from this discussion. It's not that you can lean back and it will sort of fall from heaven. I think we need to put a lot of sort of effort into it, but I think we do have options to choose from, so hence I would say let's use them, because ultimately, so to continue to use, let's say, fossil fuel sort of vehicles or variations of that, that's also the evidence, very simply. I think it will not bring us anywhere close to the sort of Paris Agreement goals, so much more needs to be done, and much more can be done.
Thank you. And Ingrid?
Yes, thank you very much. I very much agree with you, Herman. I think that it's not one easier than the other. I think we need to use all the tools in our toolbox to make it happen. There is no one magic bullet that will be sufficient for all transport modes. We'll need to work together. I'd like to pick up on certain things. Urban mobility, yes, it's definitely something that we need to work on, but also behavior. I one of my last answers to the question is that we need also to inform consumers. We tend to lose consumers, who is the end buyer of transports, and they need to make conscious choices when they need to transport themselves, being long haul or nationally or within their own city. And I think that we need to put more effort to inform the consumer on what we are doing, but also which choices you can make. And I think we are missing a bit of that in our work. We should not lose the perspective of the end consumer. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's very relevant, obviously, and especially when we also talk about the more local, urban passenger transport, where obviously the consumer is highly, highly relevant. So now turning to the audience, I think I'm going to rephrase my question a bit in terms of whether the hard-to-abate sectors are hard to abate. I rather ask you now, given Herman's statement, should the ITF make an effort to come up with a different wording, at least in our reports, other than hard to abate, but maybe go towards something ready to abate? Who would agree? Well, it doesn't seem to be yet a done deal. So maybe we stick to hard to abate for now. At least it's going to be understood by many in the audience. Okay, I think we have come to the end of our panel. We have come to the end of this session. I thank the participants, the panelists very much to being here and taking your time and for the very interesting discussions. I think we could continue quite a long time. And the audience to be here and to have this interest, and we hope to see you in other sessions very soon as well. And here I want to make an advertisement for a session that comes tomorrow morning on a similar topic, also decarbonizing transport. You have heard today a lot from, let's say, the global north. Thankfully, we had one representative from the global south, but tomorrow's session will be actually the inverse, where we will have many representatives from the global south, because we will be featuring especially our projects where we work with emerging economies. And to make it even more interesting for you, we will be using the session to award two winners of our Decarbonizing Transport in Emerging Economies award that we have launched the first time this year, and we hope that this is a success. Well, it is a success because we already know the winners, and they're very impressive, and we have seen all the applications, and they were all very impressive, so we hope to be able to continue this also in future years. So I hope this was enough teaser for you to also join tomorrow's 9 a.m. session on a similar topic. Thank you very much, everyone.